Some murders horrify us because of their brutality. Others stay with us because they force us to ask a terrifying question. How does an ordinary person become capable of something unimaginable? Not a serial killer hiding in the shadows, not a psychopath wandering the streets, a father, a neighbor, a man who smiled, went to church, paid his taxes, and then murdered his entire family. The story of John List isn't only about 5 murders. It's about the terrifying possibility that evil doesn't always look like evil. On a quiet street in New Jersey, there was a house that looked like a dream. A beautiful home, a respected family, a successful father. To the neighbors, they were the perfect American family. But inside that house, something unimaginable was about to happen. In November 1971, a man named John List made a decision that shocked an entire country. He murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 children. Then he cleaned the house, turned on the radio, and disappeared. For 18 years, he lived a completely different life. And the question remains, how could a man become a monster while everyone around him believed he was ordinary? John Emil List was born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan. He was the only child of German-American parents John Frederick List and Alma Marie Barbara Florence List, who were first cousins once removed. Like his father, List was a devout Lutheran and a Sunday school teacher. List graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943. That same year, he enlisted in the United States Army and served as a laboratory technician during World War II. His father died in 1944. After List was discharged in 1946, he enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting, and was commissioned a lieutenant through ROTC. From the outside, his life looked traditional. He was quiet, responsible, religious. In November 1950, as the Korean War escalated, List was recalled to active military service. At Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met Helen Morris Taylor, the widow of an infantry officer killed in action in Korea, who lived nearby with her daughter Brenda. He married Helen Morris in 1951, and the family moved to Northern California. The Army, recognizing List's accounting skills, reassigned him to the Finance Corps. After completion of his second tour in 1952, List worked for an accounting firm in Detroit, and then as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo, where his 3 children were born between 1955 and 1958. By 1959, List had risen to general supervisor of the company's accounting department. But Helen, an alcoholic, had become increasingly unstable due to syphilis she had contracted from her first husband, which she did not disclose to List before their marriage. In 1960, his stepdaughter Brenda married and left the household, and List moved with the remainder of his family to Rochester, New York, to take a job with Xerox. There, he eventually became director of accounting services. In 1965, List accepted a position as vice president and controller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey, and moved with his wife, children, and mother into Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion located at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. It was impressive. It represented everything John List wanted: success, stability, respect. This is where our minds begin to resist, because stories like this destroy one of our most comforting illusions, the illusion that good people look one way and bad people another. Reality is rarely that simple. Human beings are far more complicated, and perhaps that's exactly what makes stories like this so difficult to forget. But behind the beautiful walls, the family was falling apart. John List lost his job. He struggled financially, but the biggest problem was not only money. It was his obsession with appearances. John List believed that a man's worth was connected to his ability to provide. Admitting failure was impossible for him. Instead of asking for help, he hid the truth. He continued pretending everything was fine. Neighbors noticed strange things. The family became more isolated. John controlled many aspects of their lives. He was strict. He was distant. But nobody imagined what was coming. Losing a job doesn't create a murderer. Millions of people lose everything and never hurt anyone. So what made John List different? Was it pride? Shame? A desperate need to control everything around him? Or had something darker always been there, waiting for the moment when his carefully built identity began to collapse? People often ask, why did he do it? But perhaps that's the wrong question. Maybe we should be asking, what had been happening inside him long before that day? Tragedies rarely begin overnight. They grow quietly, thought after thought, decision after decision, hidden beneath an ordinary life, until one day, the unimaginable becomes reality. November 9th, 1971, a normal Tuesday morning. But inside the List home, known as Breeze Knoll, John List had already made his decision. He murdered his mother, wife, and 3 children, using his 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic handgun and his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver. While his children were at school, he shot his wife, Helen, 47, in the back of the head, then his mother, Alma, 84, above the left eye, as his daughter, Patricia, 16, and younger son, Frederick, 13, arrived home from school. List shot each of them in the back of the head. After making himself lunch, List drove to his bank to close his and his mother's bank accounts, then to Westfield High School to watch his elder son, John Frederick, 15, play in a soccer game. After driving John Frederick home, List shot him repeatedly because, as misfire evidence showed, his son attempted to defend himself. This is usually the moment when people stop trying to understand, and that's completely human, because understanding can feel dangerously close to excusing, but they are not the same thing. Understanding why something happened doesn't make it acceptable. It simply helps us recognize the warning signs before another tragedy unfolds. After the murders, List did something disturbing. List placed the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. He left his mother's body in her apartment in the attic. In a 5-page letter to his pastor found on the desk in his study, List claimed that he saw too much evil in the world, and he had killed his mother, wife, and 3 children to save their souls. He then cleaned the various crime scenes, removed his picture from all family photographs in the house, tuned a radio to a religious station, lowered the temperature to preserve the bodies, and departed. Before leaving, he even cut out the family's faces from photographs, as if he wanted to erase the evidence that they ever existed. 2 months before, Pat, his daughter, had been picked up by the police for walking the streets after midnight and smoking. To John List, she was trouble, and he was certain she was going straight to hell. That his wife, who no longer went to church, protected her from his anger was a sure indication that things were getting out of hand. In November of 1971, he made the decision to change everything, but it was not until December 7th that anyone realized what he had done. The murders were not discovered until December 7th, nearly a month later, partly because of the family's reclusive tendencies and also due to notes List sent to the children's schools and part-time jobs claiming that the children would be visiting their ailing maternal grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks. Helen's mother was ill and had canceled a visit to Westfield because of it. Had she made the trip, List later said, she would have been his 6th victim. List also stopped milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries. Neighbors noticed that all of the mansion's rooms were illuminated day and night, with no apparent activity within the house. After light bulbs began burning out one by one, they called the police. Around the same time, Patty's drama coach, Ed Iliano, had his own concerns, so he decided to check them out. Patty was supposed to be at a rehearsal for an upcoming play, and had not Patricia List at 16 years even sent him a note to say when she was returning from North Carolina. At one point, not long before she left, she had even told him that her father was going to kill her. He went to the house several times, and finally decided to get the police involved, but they were already on their way. Went in, stumbled upon a gruesome scene, and kept it to himself for 2 days. Finding a window unlatched, the officers entered the house. There was no heat, so the temperature inside was almost as cold as outside. Clearly no one was there, although they heard music playing loudly over an intercom system. It sounded like something from church. The place seemed barren of furniture, as if the family had moved. The officers made their way through the empty dining room and into the pantry, where they noticed dark stains on the walls. In the kitchen, the checkerboard floor was stained with dark streaks. So was the hallway beyond, and they noticed that a terrible smell was getting stronger from down that direction. They knew that something terrible had happened. It appeared as if someone had tried unsuccessfully to clean up blood. They followed the stains down the hallway toward the ballroom. In one area near the fireplace, There appeared to be mounds of clothing stacked up, and the odor in there was heavy. When their eyes adjusted to the dark, they looked at 4 corpses placed side by side on Boy Scout sleeping bags. There were rags over their faces. Trails of blood up to where they lay indicated that they had been dragged there from other rooms. The drama coach immediately identified them as Helen List and her 3 children. The 3 children lay side by side, and Helen was placed at a T-angle beyond their heads. Clearly they had been there for some time. The officers checked the rest of the house while the eerie organ music continued to play, and soon found John List's mother, Alma, murdered in the attic. She had been closed into a storage hall off the kitchen, and a dish towel was placed on her face. Her body had been oddly positioned on her back, knees spread and her calves under her, as if she had fallen to her knees and then gone over backwards. They lifted the towel and saw an expression of horror on her face. She had been shot above the left eye. More police arrived, and lights were brought in to reveal the killer's M.O. Helen had been shot in the left side of the head in the kitchen and dragged by the feet down the hall to the ballroom. Her, Helen List, mid-1960s, arms were heavily streaked with blood. The killer had left her with her nightgown ridden up, exposing her thighs. Her stomach was badly distended. Patty lay on her left side. She was wearing a coat, as if she had just come in. She too had been shot in the head, and then dragged to where she lay. Fred was on his stomach, also wearing a jacket. There was a pool of blood under his head. Brother and sister appeared to be merely asleep. John Jr. was another matter. His winter jacket was unzipped, showing that he had been shot repeatedly, in the chest and face, an attack more savage than the others had suffered. The house was searched to determine the killing pattern. Walls and floors were streaked with blood, and efforts had been made to clean up. Blood-soaked towels and newspapers, now hardened, were found in paper bags in the ballroom and kitchen. It looked as if the killer had expected to take them out with the rest of the trash. Bullet holes in several walls indicated that many shots were fired. It was Westfield's first murder in 8 years, and it was a slaughter. But John List was already gone. He changed his name. He moved to another state. He created a completely new identity. Westfield, which had few violent crimes recorded since 1963, received national attention as the site of one of the most notorious felonies in New Jersey since the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. A nationwide manhunt was launched. Police investigated hundreds of leads without success. All reliable photographs of List had been destroyed. The family car was found parked at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, but police found no evidence that List had boarded a flight. Alma's body was flown to Frankenmuth, Michigan, and interred at the St. Lorenz Lutheran Cemetery. Helen and her 3 children were buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield. Breeze Knoll remained empty until it was destroyed by fire in August 1972, 9 months after the murders. Although the destruction was officially ruled arson, it remains unsolved with no suspects. Destroyed along with the home was the ballroom's stained glass skylight, rumored to be a signed Tiffany original, worth at least $100,000 at the time, $770,000 in 2025. A new house was built on the site in 1974. In 1971, as the FBI later discovered, List had traveled by train from New Jersey first to Michigan, then to Colorado. He settled in Denver in early 1972 and took an accounting job under the name Robert Peter Bob Clark, one of List's college classmates. Other real Bob Clark later stated that he had never known List. From 1979 to 1986, he was the comptroller at a paper box manufacturer outside Denver. He joined a Lutheran congregation and ran a carpool for church members without transport. At one religious gathering, he met an Army PX clerk named Dolores Miller, and they were married in 1985. In February 1988, the couple moved into a house on Sagewood Trace in the Brander Mill community of Midlothian, Virginia, where List, still using the name Bob Clark, resumed work as an accountant at a small accounting firm, Madria, Joyner, Kirkham, and Woody. In 1972, List was proposed as a suspect in the D.B. Cooper air piracy case because of the timing of his disappearance, multiple matches to the hijacker's description, and the reasoning that a fugitive accused of mass murder has nothing to lose. List was questioned by FBI investigators after his capture, but he denied any involvement in the Cooper case. While his name is still occasionally mentioned in Cooper articles and documentaries, no direct evidence implicates him, and the FBI no longer considers him a suspect. For 18 years, he lived as Robert Clark. He got married again. He attended church. He worked. He became someone nobody suspected. For 18 years, John List wasn't hiding in the woods. He wasn't constantly running. He built another ordinary life, another marriage, another routine, which forces us to ask something deeply unsettling. Can someone completely separate themselves from what they have done? Or do they simply learn to live beside it? And perhaps that's the most disturbing truth of all. Evil doesn't always leave chaos behind. Sometimes it leaves silence. Perhaps John List believed the past had disappeared. But guilt has a strange relationship with time. Sometimes it destroys people immediately. Sometimes it waits. For nearly 2 decades, John List was one of America's most wanted fugitives. But investigators had almost no leads, until 1989. In May 1989, after 17 years, 6 months, and 23 days, the crime was recounted on the Fox television program America's Most Wanted during its first year on the air. The segment featured an age-progressed clay bust, sculpted by forensic artist Frank Bender, which turned out to bear a close resemblance to List's actual appearance. On June 1st, less than 2 weeks after the broadcast, List was arrested at his workplace, Madrea, Joyner, Kirkham & Woody, a Richmond accounting firm, after a former Denver neighbor recognized the description and alerted authorities. List continued to stand by his alias for several months, even after his 1989 extradition to Union County, New Jersey. Finally, faced with irrefutable evidence, including a fingerprint match with List's military records, as well as evidence found at the crime scene, he confessed his true identity on February 16, 1990. After 18 years of freedom, his past finally caught up with him. At trial, List testified that his financial difficulties reached crisis level in 1971, when he was laid off with the closure of the Jersey City Bank. To avoid sharing this development with his family, List engaged in the same routine and dress as when employed, leaving home each morning on schedule, and spending the day at job interviews or at the Westfield train station, reading newspapers until it was time to come home. List diverted money from his mother's bank accounts to avoid default on his mortgage. As the family's finances became more strained, List encouraged his children to seek part-time work, ostensibly to teach them maturity and responsibility, but in actuality to help keep the family financially solvent. He was also dealing with his wife's alcoholism and her untreated tertiary syphilis, contracted from her first husband and concealed for 18 years. According to trial testimony, Helen had pressured List into marriage by falsely claiming that she was pregnant, then insisted that they marry in Maryland, which did not require the premarital syphilis test mandated in most other states at the time. Though her health progressively deteriorated, she said nothing to List or her physicians until 1969, when a thorough examination revealed the condition. By then, progression of the disease combined with her excessive alcohol consumption had, according to testimony, transformed her, an unkempt and paranoid recluse, who frequently, and often publicly, humiliated List, comparing his sexual prowess unfavorably with that of her first husband. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that List suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and that he saw only 2 solutions to his situation: accept welfare, or kill his family and send their souls to heaven. Welfare was an unacceptable option, he reasoned, because it would expose him and his family to ridicule and violate his authoritarian father's teachings regarding the care and protection of family members. On April 12, 1990, List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, he denied direct responsibility for his actions. I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer. The judge was unpersuaded. John Emil List is without remorse and without honor, he said. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. He imposed a sentence of 5 terms of life imprisonment, to be served consecutively, the maximum permissible penalty at the time. List filed an appeal of his convictions on grounds that his judgment had been impaired by post-traumatic stress disorder due to his military service. He also argued that the letter he left behind at the crime scene, essentially his confession, was a confidential communication to his pastor and therefore inadmissible as evidence. A federal appeals court rejected both arguments. List eventually expressed a degree of remorse for his crimes. "I wish I had never done what I did," he told Connie Chung in 2002. "I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." When asked why he had not taken his own life if he felt so overwhelmed, he said he believed that suicide would have prevented him from going to heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family. The List case is frequently studied in criminology because it combines familicide, long-term identity concealment, and the successful use of forensic facial reconstruction in solving a major fugitive case. It has been featured in numerous documentaries, true crime books, and television programs as an example of how advances in forensic investigation and public appeals can resolve decades-old cases. List died in prison on March 21, 2008, at age 82 from complications of pneumonia while serving his life sentences. His crimes remain one of the most infamous family murder cases in modern American criminal history and continue to be referenced in discussions of family annihilators, fugitive investigations, and forensic identification techniques. Over the years, List and his crimes have furnished inspiration for documentaries, television dramas, and feature films. Examples include Savior, Season 6, Episode 16 of the television series Law and Order, Family Values, Season 8, Episode 9 of Law and Order Criminal Intent, the 1987 film The Stepfather and its 2009 remake, the 1993 film Judgment Day, the John List story, in which List was portrayed by Robert Blake, and the character Kaiser Soze in the 1995 film The Usual Suspects. In 2008, John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted, donated the age-progressed bust by Frank Bender that played a pivotal role in List's apprehension to a forensic science exhibition at the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C., whose collection was later moved to Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. A 1996 episode of the series Forensic Files discussed the List murders. A 2003 episode of the A&E series American Justice also detailed the case and featured an interview with List. In 2015, the story was covered in the Season 2, Episode 2 of the Investigation Discovery TV series Your Worst Nightmare. The episode, Murder House, premiered on November 18, 2015. The movie A Killer Next Door, based on the events that led to the capture of John List, was released in July 2020. In 2022, New Jersey Advance Media released Father Wants Us Dead, a podcast serial on the events. Also in 2022, Netflix released a 7-part dramatic fictional miniseries called The Watcher. Although it is a work of fiction based on a real article, much of the character John Graff was borrowed from the story of the John List murders. The character of John Graff, played by Joe Mantello, was identical to John List in several ways, such as his being an accountant, attending a Lutheran church, and murdering his family members and live-in mother, along with leaving music playing in the house and planning an alibi that would cause the bodies to remain undiscovered for several weeks. When stories like this end, we expect answers. But the most haunting cases rarely give us any. Instead, they leave us with questions. Because evil doesn't always shout, it doesn't always look frightening. Sometimes it wears a suit, smiles politely, greets the neighbors, and that's why this story still matters decades later. Not because of what happened, but because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We may never fully understand the human mind. The story of John List is terrifying not only because of what he did, but because of how ordinary he appeared. He was not a stranger hiding in the darkness. He was a neighbor, a husband, a father, a man who cared more about appearing perfect than facing reality. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are not hidden in abandoned places. Sometimes they are hidden behind the doors of ordinary homes. Because evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it looks completely normal. We will probably never know exactly what was happening inside his mind, and perhaps that's the most unsettling part of all. But now we'd like to hear from you. Do you believe evil is something people are born with, or does it emerge only when fear, shame, and desperation finally take control? To help our channel grow, please like this video, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you don't miss future episodes. Every legend begins with a story. Every monster begins with a human. This was The Dark Archive.